AI, which is what we love. Thank you so much for listening. Talk back with Hugh Hamilton coming up very, very soon. Also, don't forget, tonight is the WBAI art auction at the Stephen Casher Gallery in Chelsea. It's on at 7:30 p.m. We hope to see you down there. Lots of BAI producers. And, of course, all the artists will be there. It'll be a great night. That's tonight at the Stephen Casher Gallery in Chelsea. Hugh Hamilton with Talkback coming up very, very shortly. This is WBAI 99.5 FM and WBAI.org on the web.
Tonight, we invite you to join listeners, WBAI producers and several celebrity guests for the art event of the season. It's finally here. The first annual WBAI Benefit Silent Art Auction is on tonight at 7:30 p.m. at the Stephen Casher Gallery in Chelsea. For all the details, go to WBAIauction.org. That's WBAIauction.org. You can view photography, painting, sculpture and posters donated by 100 distinguished artists from New York that include Richard Avedon, Spencer Tunick, Kiki Smith, Faith Ringgold, Tom Ottinus, and much more. Join us as the New York City art community comes out to help reboot WBAI. It's the first annual WBAI Benefit Silent Art Auction. Tonight, 7:30 p.m. at the Stephen Casher Gallery, 521 West 23rd Street in Chelsea. Go to WBAIauction.org for more details.
So here we go again. A very good afternoon to you. This is listener-sponsored commercial-free radio. It's WBAI New York. Today, Wednesday, December 5th. I am Hugh Hamilton, and the program Talkback is a program that is dedicated to the advancement of the public understanding. Look at this. In what must be something like 32 point, there's a new pledge number right here, sitting in front of me. It says 917-580-6021. That's 917-580-6021. I think what we'll do is I'll take a friendly bet here with Reggie Johnson, who is our audio engineer in this segment of the program, while we await Michael G. Haskins, who is on his way here from another assignment, and that is, let's see who is going to be the first person to revert to the previous number, which of course is not operational because this is a temporary number. Has anybody done this so far today?
Not yet.
Done the 209-2950?
I know it's natural.
Yeah. Right.
I mean, eventually it will happen somewhere. Between now and the end of the night, it probably will happen.
It is going to happen. Yep, that's right. But it hasn't happened yet. Not yet. Okay, so let's hope I'm not going to be the first person who will revert to the...
We'll cross fingers and toes on that one.
Exactly. but here's the new pledge number. Now, why do we have a new pledge number? Because here at 120 Wall Street, from which, as you know, WBAI was displaced for several weeks as a result of Hurricane Sandy, because of that displacement and the effects of Hurricane Sandy, since we've returned, we have been unable to use our regular telephone numbers because Verizon has not yet been able to restore telephone service using the lines and whatever it is, the technology, the lines, the infrastructure that was here all along, because that is the infrastructure that was covered in salt water. So there's all kinds of stuff going on in the basement and in the sub-basement of this building with electrical work and wiring and telephones and yada yada. So in order for us to be able to do this membership drive, what we've had to do is, as I understand it, to contract with an independent provider of telecommunication services for to get this service and these numbers specifically for this occasion. So the number is 917-580-6021. Okay, that's 917-580-6021. Okay, great. We have it. Thank you very much indeed. I'm just talking here with Joanne, who is giving me my marching orders and telling me what thank you gifts we have available this afternoon. Does each one of these is the $75 pledge, or is it that all three together?
The whole three.
All three together for a pledge of $75. Correct? Okay. I see. Oh, okay. All right. Let's see what happens. Thank you very much. Thank you very much indeed. It is now 6 minutes after the hour, and I want to begin this program today by reading from the introduction to Cris Hedges' latest book, Days of Destruction, Days of Revolt, in which Cris Hedges writes, "The rise of corporatism began with the Industrial Revolution, westward expansion, and the genocide carried out in the name of progress and Western civilization against Native Americans. It does not denote simply an economic system, but an ideology, a way of looking and dealing with each other and the world around us. This ideology embraces the belief that societies and cultures can be regenerated through violence. It glorifies profit and wealth. But this belief that we have a divine right to resources, land, and power, and a right to displace and kill others to obtain personal and national wealth, has left in its wake a trail of ravaged landscapes and incalculable human suffering across the country and the planet. What was done to Native Americans was the template. It would be done to people in the Philippines, Cuba, Vietnam, Iraq, and Afghanistan, and it is now finally being done to us. This tyranny and exploitation have become our own." That from Cris Hedges, his introduction to his latest book, Days of Destruction, Days of Revolt. He continues, "The ruthless hunt for profit creates a world where everything and everyone is expendable. Nothing is sacred. It has blighted inner cities, turned the majestic Appalachian Mountains into a blasted moonscape of poisoned water, soil, and air. It has forced workers into a downward spiral of falling wages and mounting debt, until laborers in agricultural fields and sweatshops work in conditions that replicate slavery. It has impoverished our working class and ravaged the middle class, and it has enriched a tiny global elite that has no loyalty to the nation state. These corporations, if we use the language of patriotism, are traitors. The belief that human beings and human societies should be ruled by the demands of the marketplace is utopian folly. Hedges writes that there is nothing in human history or human nature that supports the idea that sacrificing everything before the free market leads to a social good. And yet we have permitted this utopian belief system to determine how we structure our economy, labor, education, culture, and our relations with foreign nations, as well as how we treat the ecosystem on which we depend for life. The hollow protestations of the courtiers in the media, the government, and the universities, who still chant the official mantra of free markets, have little substance when they are set against reality. Corporate capitalism will quite literally kill us, he writes, as it has killed Native Americans, African Americans trapped in our internal colonies in the inner cities, those left behind in the devastated coal fields, and those who live as serfs in our nation's produce fields. The game, however, is up. The clock is ticking toward internal and external collapse. Even our corporate overlords no longer believe the words they utter. They rely instead on the security and surveillance state for control. The rumble of dissent that rises from the Occupy movements terrify them, and it creates a new narrative. It exposes their exploitation and cruelty, and it shatters the absurdity of their belief system. That from the introduction to his new book. The book is called Days of Destruction, Days of Revolt. Cris Hedges, the author. Now, Hedges invites us to consider, for example, some of the following indicators of who we are, how we live, and what we have become. Consider this. That among the industrialized nations, the United States today has the highest poverty rate, both generally and for children, the greatest inequality of incomes, the lowest government spending as a percentage of GDP on social programs for the disadvantaged, the lowest score on the United Nations Index of Material Well-Being for Children, the worst score on the United Nations Gender Inequality Index, and the lowest score of social mobility among industrialized nations. That's who we are. That's what we have become. But these trends in the United States are accompanied by the fact that we also have here in the United States, among the industrialized nations, we also have the highest infant mortality rate, the highest prevalence of mental health problems, the highest obesity rate, the highest proportion of population going without health care due to cost, the second lowest birth rate for children per capita behind only Japan, the highest consumption of antidepressants per capita, the third shortest life expectancy at birth behind only Denmark and Portugal, the highest carbon dioxide emissions and water consumption per capita, but the second lowest score on the World Economic Forum's Environmental Performance Index behind only Belgium. We have the third largest ecological footprint per capita, behind only Belgium and Denmark, and the highest rate of failure to ratify international agreements. We have in this country, among industrialized nations, the highest failure, as I mentioned, to ratify international agreements, but we also have the lowest spending on international development and humanitarian assistance as a percentage of GDP, and the highest military spending as a proportion of GDP, and the largest international arms sales, but yet we also have the third lowest scores for student performance in math, behind only Portugal and Italy, and we're far from the top in both science and reading. We have in the United States, among the industrialized nations of the world, the second highest high school dropout rate behind only Spain, the highest homicide rate, and the largest prison population per capita. Now, all of that, and the book hasn't even begun. That is still from the introduction to his latest book, Days of Destruction, Days of Revolt, by Cris Hedges. Now, on the just about the time that Hurricane Sandy struck, I was due to return here to the radio station, and my plan at that time had been to present, as you know, we had a fundraising drive in progress at the time of Hurricane Sandy, and just about the time that the hurricane struck, I was due to return, and my intention had been to present as a thank you gift to you a copy of my evening with Cris Hedges that was held at the Society for Ethical Culture on Monday, I think it was a Monday, October 15th. Now, that event was very well attended. It was a really remarkable event, and I have received only superlative comments about the quality of the presentations, about the conviviality of those who were in attendance, attendance, and it was altogether a wonderful evening. And to those of you who were there, I want now, albeit somewhat belatedly, but I do want now to say thank you so much for having been there and for having made that event such a resounding success. An evening with Cris Hedges. There were only two speakers that evening. I introduced Cris Hedges, and Cris Hedges spoke. And we also, there was also a question and answer session. And all of this was recorded, both in video and audio. And I thought it would be, for those of you who were there, if you would be inclined to make a pledge of support to this radio station this afternoon, an additional pledge of support, because it was a fundraiser. If you'd like to get this as a memento, your $75 pledge of support as to WBAI this afternoon will get you as a thank you gift your choice of an evening with Cris Hedges, either on DVD or on audio CD. That's a pledge of $75. Am I correct, Joanne? A pledge of $75 will get you on either your choice of either audio CD or on DVD an evening with Cris Hedges. The evening was titled Days of Destruction, Days of Revolt, which is also the title of Hedges' latest book, Days of Destruction, Days of Revolt. Now, those of you who attended the reception that evening would also have received as part of your the price of admission, so to speak, would also have received your own copy of Days of Destruction, Days of Revolt, and scores of you had your copies signed by Cris Hedges, autographed that evening. That was also a fun part of the evening. But get this, if you were not in attendance, but you'd like to get that evening with Cris Hedges, Days of Destruction, Days of Revolt, either on DVD or on audio CD, you also have an opportunity to get a copy of the book, if you don't yet have it, along with the audio CD or DVD. And that pack will, that's a $125 pledge to WBAI. So at two levels here. Your $75 pledge gets you an evening with Cris Hedges, Days of Destruction, Days of Revolt. That was the evening in October at the Society for Ethical Culture, which I hosted, and at which Cris Hedges presented a tremendous, it was a remarkable talk that evening. And I'm going to share excerpts from it in a matter of moments. But here's a reminder of the telephone number to call with your pledge of support to WBAI. The number is 917 580-6021. That's 917-580-6021. You might like to make a note of that because it's a different number. It's not the usual number, as you know, not the number that we wake up screaming in our sleep after about 2 or 3 weeks of this, of these drives. It's 917. Just before you go, could we get some clarification on these three? If a person wants to get my three lectures, this trilogy of lectures of interviews that I did with Cris Hedges, Death of the Liberal Class, Empire of Illusion, and Days of Destruction, if a person wants to get all three of these on audio CD, that is going to be at what pledge level?
For the three interviews, listeners can receive them at the $75 pledge level.
$75 pledge will get all three of them.
All three.
Oh, that's wonderful. All right. Hey, thank you very much.
It's a great deal.
Absolutely it is. Thank you very much, Joanne. Okay. So there you heard it. In addition to an evening with Cris Hedges, Days of Destruction, Days of Revolt, which is available on audio CD or on DVD as a thank you gift with your pledge at the $75 level, we also have the trilogy of interviews that I did with Cris Hedges after the publication of each of his last three books, The Empire of Illusion, Death of the Liberal Class, and Days of Destruction. After each of these, I did a signature interview with Cris Hedges, and all three of those interviews are available on audio CD as a pack with your pledge. As a thank you gift, we'll send it to you as a thank you gift with your pledge at the $75 level. And remember, at the $125 level, if you would like to get both an evening with Cris Hedges as well as a copy of his book, latest book, if you don't yet have it, Days of Distruction, Days of Revolt, thank you very much indeed. We will send you those at the $125 pledge level. Okay? So, there we have it. And the number that ringing you here, that number is 917-580-6021. That's 917-580-6021. Please continue to call while the presentation is in progress. But before we get to, and I am going to share extended excerpts from Cris Hedges' talk, his presentation that evening. I'm going to skip my introduction, which is really not a part of the, well, maybe it is. Some people have said to me they rather liked it. Well, when you get it on DVD or audio CD, you can judge for yourself. But I'm going to share with you extended excerpts from Cris Hedges' lecture that evening at the Society for Ethical Culture. We're going to do that in a moment. But before we do, I do want to share with you an excerpt. I want to read from Hedges' book, Days of Distruction, Days of Revolt, from what is my favorite chapter in the book. Now, the book covers, Cris Hedges and Joe Sacco went to a number of locations in the country to visit what they call the sacrifice zones, which are those areas of the country that have been offered up for exploitation in the name of profit, progress, and technological advancement. They visited Pine Ridge, South Dakota, Camden, New Jersey, Walsh in West Virginia, Immokalee, Florida, and Zuccotti Park here in New York City. And in each of those locations, they did an extensive study of the local conditions and the way of life, and they also did examine the arc of recent history in those communities, and how this descent into corporatism and into laissez-faire capitalism and the madness of free enterprise run amok, how all of that has transformed these communities, these societies. And the one that perhaps I can relate to most is the story of Camden, New Jersey, perhaps because it is so close to where we are geographically. And ever so often I have passed through Camden. Well, I have passed over Camden. Quite literally, you pass over Camden most of the time. It's one of those, some years ago there was this talk about flyover country, meaning the entire middle section of the country that nobody goes to unless you live there. It's you either, when you are moving from one coast to another coast, you fly over the entire middle of the country. Well, Camden has become a sort of flyover country for many of us, because few people ever have reason to drive through or to visit Camden, New Jersey. I've had reason and opportunity to visit Camden, New Jersey, and so much of what Cris Hedges and Joe Sacco write about, and Joe Sacco is an award-winning graphic artist. So he's one of the world's greatest cartoonists, in fact, widely hailed as the creator of what is known as the War Reportage comic. He's author of several books, including the American Book Award-winning Palestine Footnotes in Gaza, which received a number of prizes. So he has a series of drawings in this book that tell the story graphically. That is the story that is narrated in words by Cris Hedges. It's really a beautiful collaboration. But anyway, as I was saying, much of what Cris Hedges and Joe Sacco report on, I can relate to directly because I have been able to witness some of this, not all of it, but some of it, with my own eyes, having had occasion and opportunity to visit the city of Camden, New Jersey. So in chapter 2 of the book, the chapter is titled Days of Siege, Hedges and Sacco focus on the city of Camden, New Jersey as an example of what they call the sacrifice zones in America. Those areas of the country that have been offered up for exploitation in the name of profit, progress, and technological advancement. I just want to read from a part, a part of that chapter for you, in which Hedges writes, "The decline of America is a story of gross injustices, declining standards of living, stagnant or falling wages, long-term unemployment and underemployment, and the curtailment of basic liberties, especially as we militarize our police. It is a story of the weakest forever being crushed by the strong. It is the story of unchecked and unfettered corporate power, which has taken our government hostage, overseen the dismantling of our manufacturing base, bankrupted the nation, and plundered and contaminated our natural resources. Once communities break down physically, they break down morally. The corporations and industries that packed up and left Camden and cities across the United States seeking cheap and unprotected labor overseas are never coming back. And in moments of candor, our corporate overlords admit this truth. When Barack Obama had dinner in February of 2011 with business leaders in Silicon Valley, each guest was asked to come with a question for the president, according to a story in the New York Times. As Steve Jobs of Apple Inc. spoke, President Obama interrupted, the paper reported, with an inquiry of his own. What would it take to make iPhones in the United States? Almost all of the 70 million iPhones, 30 million iPads, and 59 million other Apple products that were sold in 2011 were manufactured overseas. Jobs responded, according to another dinner guest, that those jobs are not coming back. In 2011, Hedges recalls, Apple earned more than $400,000 in profit per employee. More than Goldman Sachs, ExxonMobil, or Google, the Times pointed out. It has more cash in its vault than the U.S. Treasury. It employs 43,000 people in the United States and 20,000 overseas, a small fraction of the over 400,000 American workers at General Motors in the 1950s or the hundreds of thousands at General Electric in the 1980s. But these numbers do not include the 700,000 people who work for Apple contractors to engineer, build, and assemble iPads, iPhones, and Apple's other products. Almost none of them work in the United States. Working conditions for these Apple workers typify the misery endured by the corporate global labor force. Low wages, excessive overtime, in some cases 7 days a week and up to 12 hours a day, squalor and overcrowding in worker dormitories, swelling in the legs and difficulty walking because of so many hours on their feet, underage workers, improperly disposed of hazardous waste, falsified records, a callous disregard for workers' health, lax or unenforced labor and safety laws, and union busting. As Hedges reports, whole sections of U.S. cities, because of the ability to export manufacturing overseas, are industrial ghost towns. The human cost of this relentless search for greater profit is never factored into the balance sheets of corporations. If prison labor or subsistence labor in China or India or Vietnam makes them more money, if it is possible to hire workers in Bangladesh sweatshops for 22 cents an hour, corporations follow the awful logic to its conclusion. The requiem for Camden, he writes, is the requiem for us all. Here, he offers us a description now of Camden, New Jersey. Remember, Camden, New Jersey is about 90 miles away from here. I think it's, just about 90 miles away from where we are right now. Cris Hedges writes, Camden is a dead city. It makes and produces nothing. It is the poorest city in the United States and is usually ranked as one of the most and often the most dangerous. In early 2011, nearly half of the city's police force, 168 officers, were laid off because of a $26 million budget shortfall. By the end of 2011, although more than 100 officers had been rehired, homicides had climbed by 30% and burglaries by more than 40% from the previous year. Mayor Dana Red, an African-American, responded to the upsurge in crime in December of 2011 by calling for a county takeover of the city's police force, a call the police union said was designed primarily to break the union to hire cheaper, non-unionized workers. Camden City Council President Frank Moran proposed that the state should send in the National Guard or increase the numbers of state troopers assigned to the city. Hedges writes, Camden is beset with the corruption and brutal police repression reminiscent of the despotic regimes I covered in Africa, the Middle East, and Latin America. Remember, this is Cris Hedges reporting here. Cris Hedges, by the way, let me just say parenthetically, for those who are not familiar with his work, is not only a senior fellow at the Nation Institute, but is and author of 12 books, but is perhaps most well known internationally as a distinguished foreign correspondent who served on the front lines in Central America, the Middle East, Africa, and the Balkans. He was in fact part of the New York Times team that won the 2002 Pulitzer Prize for the paper's coverage of global terrorism. So he is an international journalist who's been to the front lines in many parts of the world. So when he writes about brutal police repression in Africa, the Middle East, and Latin America, he's talking from first-hand experience, having been there as a journalist on the front lines in some of the most turbulent spots in the world. So he writes, the per capita income in the city of Camden, New Jersey, is $11,967. Nearly 40% of the city lives below the poverty line. Large swaths of the city are abandoned. There are more than 1,500 derelict, gutted row houses. The empty shells of windowless brick factories, warehouses, and abandoned gas stations surround the city. There are overgrown vacant lots filled with garbage and old tires and rusted appliances. There are neglected, weed-filled cemeteries and boarded-up storefronts. There are perhaps 100 open-air drug markets, most run by gangs such as the Bloods, the Latin Kings, Los Nietos, MS-13, or Mara Salvatrucha. Knots of young Hispanic or African-American men in black leather jackets, occasionally flipping through wads of cash, sell weed, dope, and crack to clients, many of whom drive in from the suburbs in brazen defiance of the law. The drug trade is the city's only thriving business. A weapon is never more than a few feet away from the drug dealers, usually stashed behind a trash can, in the grass, or on a porch. Camden is awash in guns, which are easily purchased across the river in Philadelphia, where Pennsylvania gun laws are notoriously lax. Guns are kept for protection from rival gangs that send out groups to prey on drug dealers, stealing their drugs and cash. Non-violence is a luxury few on the streets can afford. Listen to that sentence. Non-violence is a luxury few on the streets can afford. Now, this is a major American city we're talking about here. A city that is, as I said, 90 miles away from where we are right now. Okay, and this is a city that so many people on your way to Washington, D.C., on your way to Maryland, when you're driving up I-95 or driving down I-95 south, you pass over Camden, which is something that he writes about later on. Because what they've done, what they've done is that they've created now this series, this system of overpasses, so you never have to see what is going on down there, and you're blissfully going through on your megabus or Greyhound or in your car or whatever it is, however you're migrating. And of course, the I-95 South corridor is one of the most heavily trafficked corridors in the country. So people are passing there by the hundreds of thousands, and nobody is aware of what is going on under there, because there's no reason to stop. There's no reason to go there. There's no reason to visit. There's no reason to know. And if you don't know, then you don't have to feel something about it. If you don't know, you don't have to do something about it. If you don't know, it does not have to enter into your active consciousness, and therefore it does not have to inform your decision making and the choices that you make about the people you vote for and about the kinds of public policies that you support or endorse, because all of this is taking place in a dark place to which you have not had occasion to bear witness. So I am mentioning all this and sharing all this afternoon, all this to say that this book, Days of Destruction, Days of Revolt, it is the third book in a trilogy written by Cris Hedges, the Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist. The preceding books were Empire of Illusion and Death of the Liberal Class. After the publication of each of these books, I did an interview with Cris Hedges, which became a sort of signature interview. When I talk about an interview, I'm not talking here about a 10-minute thing. I'm talking about each interview is at least an hour long. A couple of them, I think, go over into 2 CD. One of them definitely is a double CD, which means that it's got more than 80 minutes of material on it. So that just gives you a sense of what I'm talking about. And those 3 interviews, those 3 definitive interviews on each of those books, Empire of Illusion, Death of the Liberal Class, and Days of Destruction, you get all 3 of those interviews. It's a wonderful package. You can get it as a gift for someone, and you can get it as a thank you gift when you make a pledge to WBAI of $75. It doesn't get any better than that. A $75 pledge, thank you so much, gets you that trilogy of interviews on audio CD. Then, as I mentioned, the last event that I hosted with Cris Hedges was at the Society for Ethical Culture on October 15th of this year. This was an evening with Cris Hedges titled Days of Destruction, Days of Revolt. We gave it the title of his latest book. And that event was also recorded both on video and on audio CD. The video or audio CD of that event is available to you as a thank you gift with your pledge at the $75 level. And if you'd like to get both the recording and a copy of the book, we have the book is in hardcover. It's a brand new book. So if you'd like to get both the recording, either on audio CD or on DVD, as well as the book, your pledge at the $175 level to WBAI will get you those. So here's the number again. Remember, it's a different number. It's a new number. This is a temporary number that we've had to somehow or other obtain from some independent contractor because our regular phones have still not been restored by Verizon to this building. The number to call with your pledge of support is 917-580-6021. That's 917-580-6021. You call that number. You can use your Visa, American Express, or MasterCard. You can honor your pledge with a personal check or money order. You can use the electronic funds transfer system or the installment plan. The number is 917. I nearly did it. You know, I took a bet. Michael G. Haskins, our audio engineer, director of incidental music, is here. I took a bet with Reggie. Has anybody so far for today reverted to actually said the old number on the air? He said he said no, but I said let's see who's going to be the first person.
Well, you know, Hugh, what has happened is we've gotten the 2 and then we caught ourselves. We didn't go through the whole 212, but as we say 2, the brain kicks in, and so we know we have to go to 917. That's the new number. Our emergency number is not a new number for BAI, but it is BAI's emergency number, and that's what it is, 917-580-6021. And people are calling that number. They remember that number now, and we're happy that they're calling for Talkback with Hugh Hamilton.
Indeed. Thank you very much, Mr. Michael G. Haskins. That's 917-580-6021. Thank you so much. 917-580-6021. Now, I should also tell you that, and we're going to start this. I'm going to share an excerpt from this with you. We're going to start right after I had introduced Cris Hedges. So the first thing you're going to hear is some applause, and then you're going to hear Cris Hedges offer an assessment of my professional capabilities and accomplishment, which is really very flattering coming from Cris Hedges. As you know, I often say that Cris Hedges is one of the five most outstanding intellectuals of our time, and it really doesn't matter who the other 4 are. So it's really it was really an honor to share the stage with him at the Society for Ethical Culture. Please continue to call. That number is 917-580-6021. And why are we asking you to do this? Because WBAI is a listener-sponsored commercial-free radio station. You see, that rise of corporate nepotism that Cris Hedges is talking about, that is what we're trying to stay away from, because it comes with a cost. You see, you can accept corporate dollars. You can accept corporate largesse. But what it will do is it will constrict your editorial freedom, and it will dictate, the money will dictate the types of editorial choices and priorities that you are able to make. It will dictate the kind of content that you are able to put on the air. It will dictate the kind of conversations that you are able to accommodate on the air. In other words, it will take over your operation. And WBAI, part of the Pacifica Foundation, that's a not-for-profit foundation, 501c3, and which reminds me that your donation is a tax-deductible donation to WBAI. And you can make a pledge of support, you can make a donation to this radio station at any level that is comfortable and convenient for you. We're offering you thank you gifts at the $75 level here this afternoon, but that you should not be constrained in your generosity by the fact that we're offering thank you gifts only at those levels. If you'd like to make a $1,000 or a $5,000 donation, tax deductible year-end, end-of-year donation to WBAI, remember that it is tax deductible to the fullest extent allowable under law. So if you're going to do that, you're looking at we're just about 28. Today's the 5th, is it? We're just about 26 days away from the end of the year, and so if you're thinking, well, I've got some extra money left over here that I'd like to invest as a charitable donation, well, WBAI is a 501c3 entity, so your tax deductible donation is tax deductible to the extent allowable under fullest extent allowable under law. So the number is 917-580-6021. Your Visa, American Express, MasterCard. You can only pledge with a personal check or money order. You can use the electronic funds transfer system or the installment plan. We also have so many of our listeners and supporters who call us, and they don't want any thank you gifts. Some of you already have these items. Many of you, for example, who showed up at the Society for Ethical Culture in October and who came to the reception, and you got your copy of the book. You had it autographed by Cris Hedges and everything, and you already have this stuff. And I want to thank you very much for having supported us, because that was a very successful fundraising event for WBAI. Now, if you'd like to make an additional gift, you're welcome to do so, and we thank you so much for that. If you have not yet done so, though, and especially if you have not done so all year, we ask you to join those who are on the line right now. The number is 917-580-6021. 917-580-6021. With your tax-deductible contribution to WBAI, please continue to call while the presentation is in progress, and we thank you very much for your support. Here now, the Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist and author Cris Hedges from his talk at the Society for Ethical Culture on An Evening with Cris Hedges, discussing Days of Destruction, Days of Revolt.
Thank you. I do radio all over the country, and Hugh Hamilton is not only one of the best, but probably the best. And in show after show, where I go on with hosts who have read very little of my work, I always know I'm excited to walk into the studio with Hugh, because not only has he studied what I wrote, but he asks the most challenging, intellectually provocative, and important questions of any radio host in the United States. So it's a real honor to be here with you. Joe Sacco and I spent the last 2 years on this book, Days of Destruction, Days of Revolt. And the book, in many ways, comes out of previous work. My publisher at The Nation calls it part of a trilogy of Empire of Illusion, The End of Literacy, and The Triumph of Spectacle, and The Death of the Liberal Class. Some of you are familiar with those two previous works, but I just want to recap a little bit from Death of the Liberal Class to show you where we were headed in Days of Destruction, Days of Revolt. I had written a book for Knopf on the press. It wasn't my idea to write the book. It was Knopf's idea. And for every writer in the room, it's a good lesson as to why you should never write somebody else's idea. I turned in the manuscript to Knopf, and they read it, and they hated it. And they said that they would publish it after they assigned an editor to excise the negativity. Now, I actually happen to believe that the commercial press, including the New York Times, although it is certainly an elitist publication that has many deep and endemic flaws, is nevertheless a positive force within the society. And yet I wasn't about to ignore those flaws. There's sort of an unwritten rule at the New York Times you ingest if you are to survive at that institution, and that is do not significantly alienate those on whom we depend for access and money. You can alienate them sometimes, but if you continue to alienate them, as any courageous reporter within that institution will tell you, you are shown the door. Sidney Schanberg and others being on that list, Ray Bonner, and finally, of course, my own confrontation with the newspaper. And so I got Nation Books to buy out. You get half of your advance, roughly, and I got them to sort of pay that off and take the book. And in that process, I realized that the collapse of the press was part of a general collapse of liberal institutions. As Hugh, when he read from that section, the Democratic Party, labor, public education. New York City used to have City University, one of the greatest universities in the country, destroyed by Nelson Rockefeller, and that's just now been writ large across the United States. And I went back to World War I, to the rise of the Committee for Public Information, known as the Creel Commission, because it was headed by a muckraking journalist named George Creel. And I found that to be an extremely important moment in American history that I think explains or helps explain how we got to where we are today. What happened under the Wilson administration is that towards the end of the war, with the collapse of the Eastern Front, it became very probable that Germany or the Kaiser would be able to move up to 100 divisions over to the Western Front, meaning the defeat of the British and the French. And there had been tremendous bank loans given by Wall Street, which, if the British and French were defeated, would never be repaid. So once again, you had Wall Street putting pressure on the Wilson administration. Wilson had run for re-election in 1912 on the slogan, "He kept us out of the war to go to war." And there was a debate, a fascinating debate in the circles of power, led by Walter Lippmann, who argued with Wilson that because the war was deeply unpopular, they could create a system of mass propaganda that could seduce most of the public to back the war effort. And that the harsher forms of coercion under the Espionage Act and the Sedition Act could be used selectively to those recalcitrants like Jane Addams or Randolph Bourne or Eugene Debs who held out. And you have the creation of the first system of modern mass propaganda that employs the understanding of crowd psychology pioneered by Le Bon, Trotter, and Sigmund Freud. Edward Bernays, the father of modern public relations, comes out of the Creel Commission. And that's where you get Lippmann's book, published after the war, Public Opinion, which uses that phrase, manufacturing consent. When Chomsky and Herman write their book on the press, that's where they get the title from. And they're right. They create this massive system of propaganda that has its own film division in Hollywood, making things like The Kaiser, The Butcher of Berlin, that has its speakers bureaus, its own news division that churns out pro-war news stories, and it's only a minority that refused to be seduced by the war effort. Indeed, Randolph Bourne and Jade Addams, in their writings, spend a lot of time despairing of how easily the radical and intellectual class are seduced into the war effort. Now, there's a writer who's not read much anymore, who I admire very much, named Dwight MacDonald. And if anyone of you know Chomsky's formation as an intellectual, you'll know that MacDonald ran a magazine in the late 40s, I think it was, for 5 years, called Politics, in which he published Bedelheim, Hannah Arendt, George Orwell, and others. And Chomsky's political awakening came from reading Dwight MacDonald's Politics. And MacDonald makes two important points about what happened in World War I. Because, of course, the pro-war effort didn't just sell the war. It broke the radical movements themselves. And MacDonald writes that the war was the rock on which progressive radical movements, which, as Howard Zinn has pointed out, have always been the true corrective to American democracy, were obliterated. After the war, they used the harsher measures of the Coercion and the Espionage Act against, of course, the Wobblies. Emma Goldman and Alexander Berkman are deported. The masses, which refused to publish during the war because you had to adopt a pro-war stance, is shut down, along with Appeal to Reason, a socialist journal with the fourth highest circulation in the country. Is also shut down, although during the war they had printed pro-war news stories and pro-war editorials as demanded by the government. And we enter an age that MacDonald calls a kind of the psychosis of permanent war. And he said none of the political theorists of the 19th century, including Karl Marx, anticipated this psychosis of permanent war, where you are constantly attempting to ferret out the internal enemy, the communist. And that becomes the weapon by which you destroy your radical and your popular movements. It also sees the migration from the government, once the war is over, of this vast system of propaganda to Madison Avenue, and they start working for corporations, where they overturn traditional American values of self-effacement, thrift, and replace it with the hedonism and the cult of the self. They inculcate this consumption as a kind of inner compulsion into the American public. And I think that we could say that when we talk about American values today, what we're really talking about are corporate values that have been imposed upon us very skillfully by the most sophisticated propaganda machine in human history. And it's not accidental that when Goebbels begins to amass the Nazi propaganda machine, he uses as one of his seminal texts Edward Bernay's book, Propaganda. Now, as Chomsky has pointed out correctly, the liberal class was never designed to be the political left. It was designed to be the political center. It was designed to act as a kind of safety valve to make incremental and piecemeal reform possible in a capitalist democracy. But it needed the pressure of those popular movements. And as Zinn and I consider it one of the great coups of my life, because I have to write proposals to the prison administration of what I teach, that I wrote a proposal, and it was very innocuous, saying that I wanted to teach American history. And when they approved it, I went out and bought every inmate the People's History of the United States. And I give 90-minute talks I'm pretty strict because I learned in prison that if you try and do a seminar, somehow every class ends up being about the hood, which is sort of interesting for me, but not why I'm there. And I would be giving these talks with Zinn, and I always loved Zinn. It was one of my great regrets that I never met him. But boy, I came out of that prison with such deep admiration for that man, who is cognizant from the beginning of the African American experience all through that book.
That's Cris Hedges from his evening with Cris Hedges at the Society for Ethical Culture. The title of that evening, we called it Days of Destruction, Days of Revolt, which is the title of his latest book. We're going to put that on pause for a moment because we also do have some other obligations to deal with. Among them, the fact that we are also in the midst of a local election here for the local station board here at WBAI. And there is a mandatory 5-minute presentation that is supposed to take place at this time. We're going to go to that so you can hear directly from some of the candidates who are contesting the election for the local station board. That's a 5-minute presentation, and right after that I shall return, as will Cris Hedges, and we thank you very much for your continuing support. Remember the number 917-580-6021.
The following is a statement by a candidate in the WBAI local station board election.
I am Father Luis Barrios, a 30-year WBAI listener supporter running for the board with the WBAI Justice and Unity campaign. As some responsibly advocate selling WBAI and dismantling the nation-only progressive grassroots radio network, I will strongly defend this progressive journey. I am an Afro-Boricua activist in the community, the church, and the academy. I am also an author and the co-executive director of IFCO Pastor for Peace. We need more, not less, programming for the growing Latino population. I will push Justice and Unity plan to move from Wall Street to an affordable, multi-use location. Our slate is endorsed by Charles Barron and Tim Wise, among others. Please vote for all Justice and Unity candidates. Go to www.justiceunity.org.
I am speaking on behalf of Jeremy Taylor. Don't let WBAI board members sit down. The first thing I would do if elected to the WBAI board is remove all the chairs. If board members had to stand on their feet during their long and unproductive meetings, they would probably argue less and do more. Instead of raising points of order, they might start raising money. In fact, raising money for WBAI would be my first priority because I know how to do it. I hope you will give me the opportunity to use my contacts, skills, and experience to help WBAI survive and prosper. I intend to work closely with the general manager and new program director. Feel free to email me with any questions about my candidacy at jeremy@burmarelief.org.
My name is Kaifa. I'm reading for Serene Roberts, who is running for a seat on the local board. Since my dad, Samori Marksman, asked her to work on Talkback, she's produced for Wake Up Call, the GBE, and the Haiti Show, amongst others. Serene says I've been receptionist and tally phone room coordinator at no station operations. I've been locked out the station since 2009 when my co-producer, the late Kamal Kafani, protested a board member assault on Pastor Michael Vincent Cria. Too many are locked out without notice, process, and fairness. Vital BI decisions are being made in small, quiet rooms, from emergency preparedness to selection of management by an illegally constituted committee to nepotistic hires. Shine a little light. Vote for Justice and Unity. Visit www.justiceunity.org or call 212-591-2111. I'm Kaifa Markson for Serene Roberts. Thank you.
I am speaking on behalf of Murray Gordon. I, Murray Gordon, stand for multiculturalism, diversity, and a lively exchange of ideas. I grew up in South Africa, but then left the apartheid regime to live in London, where I studied with R.D. Laing. I came to the United States to study philosophy at Stony Brook University. While there, I pioneered the African Beat radio show, which featured a mix of interviews and music. I think WBAI is an invaluable resource for airing ideas which are not heard elsewhere in the increasingly conservative political milieu. WBAI should be grown and expanded and used to promote a lively exchange of ideas online, and it should not be diminished in any way or sold to anyone else. I thank Frank Lefevre, Manny J, Saba, Pat Logan, Mario Mastandrea, Thomas Barton, and Ken Laufer for their support.
The preceding statement by the candidate does not necessarily reflect the views of the station or its staff. More important information about all of the candidates can be found at www.wbai.org.
And this is listener-sponsored, commercial-free WBAI New York, broadcasting at 99.5 FM and streaming live on the web at WBAI.org. I am Hugh Hamilton, and this is the Wednesday, December 5th edition of the program Talkback. It is also the first day of our makeup or emergency the membership and fundraising drive. As you no doubt recall, when Hurricane Sandy struck, we were in the midst of our fall fundraiser, which is the very first fundraiser of the fiscal year here at Pacifica. We were immediately displaced as a result of Sandy. So what we're doing now is taking a few days to catch up on what it was that we were unable to accomplish at that time, and we thank you very much for your forbearance and also for your support. It is now 4:00. The preceding presentation of statements by Pacifica by candidates for the local station board election is a requirement under the terms of the Pacifica bylaws, and we therefore had paused there to accommodate that presentation. But now we are returning to more of Cris Hedges' Days of Destruction, Days of Revolt. If you are only now joining us, as I indicated at the beginning of the last hour, when Hurricane Sandy struck, I had been scheduled to return to these airwaves with a fundraising presentation of my evening with Cris Hedges, which was held at the Society for Ethical Culture in Manhattan. Very, very well attended. I want to say thank you so much to all of you who came out there to that event, made it such a resounding success. And Cris Hedges presented a remarkable lecture or talk that evening about his book and related matters. And this afternoon, we are sending you, we have that recording, that evening with Cris Hedges, available on both audio CD and on DVD. Recordings were made in both video and audio. And you can get either your choice of an audio or video recording of that evening with Cris Hedges as a thank you gift with your pledge at the $75 level. You can also, if you do not yet have his latest book, Days of Destruction, Days of Revolt, with a 75, along with the DVD or the CD, you can get a copy of the book and as a thank you gift at the $125 level. So your $125 tax-deductible contribution to WBAI gets you both the recording on your choice of DVD or CD, together with his latest book, Days of Destruction, Days of Revolt. That's a $125 pledge. Or you can just get either the DVD or the CD of that evening's presentation with Cris Hedges. In addition to that, though, as you know, every time for each of the last 3 books that Hedges has written, I have done a signature interview with him. And those interviews are now a sort of companion trilogy to the last 3 books: Empire of Illusion, Death of the Liberal Class, and Days of Destruction. So I have those 3 interviews, that collection, all 3 of those interviews on a 4 CD set. All 3 of those interviews are available as a thank you gift to you with your pledge at the $75 level. So your $75 pledge, really, it's quite versatile this afternoon. You can get either the DVD or the audio CD of An Evening with Cris Hedges, or you can get all 3 of my interviews with him about his 3 latest books: Empire of Illusion, Death of the Liberal Class, and Days of Destruction. What I'd like to do now, though, is this, because we sort of lost a bit of momentum there a moment ago. What I'd like to do is let's give you a little bit of dialing music, and let's take about 2 minutes or so while you go to the phones. Here is the number. It's a new number. It's a temporary, it's an emergency number that we've had installed here because we do not yet have our regular telephone numbers and our regular telephone service from Verizon. So the number to call with your pledge of support is 917-580-6021. That's 917-580-6021. So what I'd like to do is to give you a little bit of dialing music now and take another 2 minutes or so. And in that time, we like to get 15 of your calls. The number is 917-580-6021, and then we'll return to more of the presentation from the Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist Cris Hedges. Number 917-580-6021. Thank you very much for these calls that are coming through right now. And if you know anyone in Camden, New Jersey, or if you're listening to us in Camden, New Jersey, or if you are from Camden, New Jersey, we encourage you to get either this evening with Cris Hedges or the book or get them both because Camden, New Jersey, which is right here in our neighborhood, our Signal neighborhood, well within our Signal area here at WBAI, Camden, New Jersey is featured in chapter 2 of this book, the chapter titled Days of Siege. I read a bit from that chapter, and it really is a compelling story. But the book also includes case studies of Pine Ridge, South Dakota, Walsh, West Virginia, Immokalee, Florida, and there's a chapter as well on Zuccotti Park here in New York City. The number is 917-580-6021. Now I'm going to try to see if I'm going to try to figure out when we've hit 15. Let's take another minute or two. We do need to hear from you. I know it's a new number, so you really should write it down. The number is 917-580-6021. That's 917-580-6021. That's the emergency number here at WBAI to call with your tax-deductible pledge of support to this listener-sponsored commercial-free radio station. Here's some dialing music for you.
Listen to mama and papa through his 2 cents too. So always watch your friends around you, cause some of them are not for you. To tell them by the way they handshake and posing with their plastic smile. You listen to the tone of their voices to try to pull the wool right over your eye. Wolf and shapes clothing.
Seven minutes now after the hour. This is WBAI New York. The program is Talkback. It's the Wednesday, December 5th edition of the program. I am Hugh Hamilton with Michael G. Haskins, our audio engineer and director of incidental music. This is a fundraising edition of the program here on WBAI, where it's a makeup fundraiser for the days that we lost as a result of Hurricane Sandy. The number to call with your tax-deductible contribution to join those who have already called and those who are doing so even as we speak. That number 917-580-6021. That's 917-580-6021. Let's return now, while you continue to call, let's return now to more of Cris Hedges' presentation during my evening with Cris Hedges at the Society for Ethical Culture. Cris Hedges, of course, the Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist and author, in which he discussed Days of Destruction, Days of Revolt. That evening with Cris Hedges is also available as a thank you gift. With your pledge at the $75 level, you can get it either on audio CD or on DVD. Or if you're at the $75 pledge level, you can also get my collection of 3 interviews with Cris Hedges discussing his last 3 books, the trilogy, Empire of Illusion, Death of the Liberal Class, and Days of Destruction. Or at the $125 level, you can get your choice of the DVD or CD of Cris Hedges at the Society for Ethical Culture, together with the hardcover copy of his book, Days of Destruction, Days of Revolt. However you do this, we ask you to do so this afternoon. Please continue to be generous in your support of WBAI, your year-end tax-deductible contribution to this radio station. The number to call with that tax-deductible contribution is 917-580-6021. Thank you so much. That's 917-580-6021. And we thank you very much for your support. Here now, more of the Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist and author, Mr. Cris Hedges.
That when we talk about American values today, what we're really talking about are corporate values that have been imposed upon us very skillfully by the most sophisticated propaganda machine in human history. And it's not accidental that when Goebbels begins to amass the Nazi propaganda machine, he uses as one of his seminal texts Edward Bernays' book, Propaganda. Now, as Chomsky has pointed out correctly, the liberal class was never designed to be the political left. It was designed to be the political center. It was designed to act as a kind of safety valve to make incremental and piecemeal reform possible in a capitalist democracy. But it needed the pressure of those popular movements. And as Zinn, and I consider it one of the great coups of my life, because I have to write proposals to the prison administration of what I teach, that I wrote a proposal, and it was very innocuous, saying that I wanted to teach American history. And when they approved it, I went out and bought every inmate the People's History of the United States. And I give 90-minute talks. I'm pretty strict because I learned in prison that if you try and do a seminar, somehow every class ends up being about the hood, which is sort of interesting for me, but not why I'm there. And I would be giving these talks with Zinn, and I always loved Zinn. It was one of my great regrets that I never met him. But boy, I came out of that prison with such deep admiration for that man, who is cognizant from the beginning of the African-American experience all through that book. And these inmates, they segregate, by the way, the prisons in New Jersey by gang affiliation. So this was a blood. These guys are all Bloods. And I would be giving the talk, and I'd hear, damn, we've been lied to. But as Zinn points out, and it's one of the frustrations I have even with the American left, this deification of the founding fathers. Has anyone read what Thomas Jefferson and George Washington wrote about Native Americans? You know, they enthusiastically embrace genocide, what they write about slavery, how they treat women, how they treat those without property. The last thing these people wanted, and it's quite conscious if you look at the Federalist Papers, was a popular democracy. They were terrified of direct democracy. And so they set up a system that would make it impossible through the Electoral College And remember, even in 2000, everybody likes to blame my friend Nader, Al Gore won 500,000 more votes than George Bush. And let's not even get into Florida, where they only recounted 2 counties and then bumped it up to the Supreme Court, where, like any banana republic, we got our president appointed by fiat. And every struggle in this country has been waged by marginalized popular movements that never achieved formal positions of power. They opened up this democracy. The Liberty Party that fought slavery, the suffragists who fought for women's rights, the labor movement, and finally the civil rights movement. And you could argue that until he was assassinated in April of 1968, the most powerful political figure in this country was Dr. Martin Luther King, because when he went to Memphis, 50,000 people went with him. And so you had an oligarchic elite, a business elite, white elite, that set out to destroy these movements, and they did. And at the same time, they used the specter of anti-communism to disembowel liberal institutions. Now, maybe the last time liberal institutions worked as they're designed to work in a capitalist democracy came with the New Deal, with the breakdown of capitalism and the ability to make incremental and piecemeal reform to ameliorate the injustices and suffering that had been visited on tens of millions of Americans. When Conrad Black writes his biography of Roosevelt, he says that Roosevelt's greatest achievement was that he saved capitalism. And I think that's right. After the 1950s, you have almost anyone with a moral conscience who is willing to question the assumptions and structures of power pushed out. Ellen Strecker has written 2 good books on this, the historian. Thousands, university professors, high school teachers, artists, musicians, directors, writers, journalists like I.F. Stone, who becomes a pariah and cannot get a job even at The Nation magazine. And the way this is done is, much of it is completely out of the public view. An FBI agent visits a high school, presents no evidence to the principal, blackballs a particular teacher, the teacher is called in and they lose their job. And that began the process that led to this book, because that was a process by which we, as citizens, were disempowered. And corporate forces slowly began to dismantle the last impediments to a rapacious global corporate capitalism. So that by the 1970s, we shift, in the words of the Harvard historian Charles Mayer, from an empire of production to an empire of consumption. We begin to borrow to maintain both a level of consumption and an empire we can no longer afford. And then you bring this new species of liberal, embodied in Bill Clinton, who speaks in that traditional feel your pain language of liberalism, and yet assiduously serves corporate interests and betrays the very constituency that he purportedly defends. And that is how you get NAFTA, the greatest betrayal of the working class in this country since the 1948 Taft-Hartley Act that makes it very difficult to unionize, and that's still on the books. That's how you get the destruction of welfare. And let's not forget that under the old welfare system, 70% of the recipients were children. That's how you get the deregulation of the FCC. And that's why WBAI is so important. Because Bill Clinton allowed a half dozen corporations to buy up the airwaves. Rupert Murdoch's News Corp, Viacom, General Electric, Disney, Clear Channel. Clear Channel alone owns over 1,500 stations. And they impose this bland uniformity. I mean, they've turned journalism over the electronic airways into a kind of burlesque. It's vaudeville. It reminds me of what Dorothy Parker once said about Katharine Hepburn's emotional range. As an actress, it goes from A to B. That's sort of where you are on the, you get your court gossip from Fox, spun one way, or you get your court gossip from MSNBC, spun another. But it's all the same crap. And the real issues, the issues that you do hear on WBAI that were articulated by the Occupy movement, which was a mainstream movement, are shut out by corporate systems that control the airwaves. And finally, that's how you get the deregulation of the banking system, the ripping down of the firewalls between commercial and investment banks that precipitate a global financial crisis. All that came under Clinton. And I would argue that Obama is cut out of the same mold. In some ways, Obama's worse. The assault on civil liberties under Barack Obama is worse than under the George W. Bush, if you can believe it. I mean, a man I and probably everyone in this room loathes. But just to tick it off, you have the interpretation of the 2001 Authorization to Use Military Force Act as giving the executive branch the right to assassinate American citizens. You have the FISA Amendment Act, which retroactively makes legal what under our Constitution has traditionally been illegal, the warrantless wiretapping, monitoring, and eavesdropping of tens of millions of Americans. And now we know that all of our personal information is being stored in supercomputers out in Utah. And why was it retroactive? Because the large telecommunication companies like Verizon, and AT&T had turned this information over, which under our Constitution is illegal, to the government. And so there were a series of smaller cases working their way up in the lower court, which they knew they'd lose. So their lobbyists had to make sure and write it in that they had retroactive immunity, which they gave them. The refusal to restore habeas corpus, the use of the Espionage Act 6 times. Now, the Espionage Act, which is the equivalent of our Foreign Secret Act, was never designed to shut down whistleblowers. The first time it was used that way was by Nixon, who, by the way, was our last liberal president. Not because Nixon was a liberal, but because he was scared of movements when we still had movements. There's a great scene in Kissinger's memoirs, Don't Buy the Book, where Nixon and Kissinger are standing at a window. I think it's 1971. There's a huge anti-war demonstration. And Nixon, to protect himself, has gotten empty buses end to end and put them, like, in the cowboy movies, all the way around the White House. And he's standing at the window and he's wringing his hands and he's going, Henry, they're going to break through the barricades and get us. And that's just where we want people in power to be. None of the forces that opened up this democracy ever achieved formal political power. And that was our failing for those of us who care about an open, egalitarian society. It's not our job to take power. It's our job to be in perpetual alienation from power, to constantly pressure power. There's a great book, Karl Popper, The Open Societies and Its Enemies, and he says in it, the question is not how do you get good people to rule. That's the wrong question. Popper writes, most people attracted to power are at best mediocre which is Obama, or venal, which is Bush or Romney. The question is, how do you make those in power frightened of you? And what single figure, up until 1968, who terrified Lyndon Johnson more than anyone else in the United States? Dr. King. And when King went to Riverside Church a year to the day before he was assassinated, and let me do the backstory of that because you may not know it. I write for Truth Dig. It's a website run by Bob Scheer out of L.A. Bob Scheer used to be the editor of Ramparts. Now, Ramparts, like BAI, doesn't make any money. Never made any money. And Bob Scheer, and if you know Bob, he's just a great guy. You probably know him. Bob had this clever business idea where he would take an advertisement, a real advertisement from Time magazine of Pan American Airlines and put it on the back of the magazine to give it respectability in the hopes that it might actually attract other advertisers, of which he had none. The only thing that happened was that Pan Am sued him to take the ad off. It's always, if anyone knows the history of media, it's always the alternative media that pressures the commercial media into doing their job. You hear about Watergate. You hear about the Pentagon Papers. None of that would have happened without the alternative press that never made a cent. And King was sitting in an airport with Ralph Abernathy, and he was reading Ramparts. And he opened the magazine, and he saw that iconic picture of the small girl, napalmed, burning, running down the road naked. And he pushed his food away. And Abernathy said, "Is there something wrong with your food?" And King said, "Nothing will taste right until I denounce this war." And he did. And you know what happened when he denounced the war? Lyndon Johnson had 4 planes, because King had, innumerable death threats. He had 4 plainclothes FBI agents assigned to him. And when he denounced the war, they were all taken away. And both King and Johnson knew what that meant. It's always the alternative forces that pressure the mainstream, the traditional liberal establishment, to respond. And unfortunately, with liberal institutions now so corporatized and decayed, with not just the destruction of the press, the destruction of labor, innumerable examples. I mean, let's not forget the Chicago teachers' strike was carried out in defiance of traditional labor and defiance of the Democratic Party. And you hear the Democrats talk about bailing out the auto industry, but what they don't tell you is that in that bailout, they forced the UAW to reduce the wages of unionized workers from $76 an hour to $50, to allow the auto industry to hire their new workforce at $14 an hour, and then to write into the agreement that the UAW could not strike, and if they did strike, all the bailout money would have to be repaid. There is a constant effort within this corporate structure to destroy all of the mechanisms by which citizens created this middle class, created a life of dignity. It's all being dismantled. And we have undergone, I think, what the political philosopher Sheldon Wolin correctly calls inverted totalitarianism. And by that, it's not classical totalitarianism. It doesn't find its expression through a demagogue or a charismatic leader, but through the anonymity of the corporate state. That in classical totalitarian regimes, you have a reactionary or a revolutionary force that overthrows a decaying structure. In inverted totalitarianism, you have corporate forces that purport to pay fealty to electoral politics, the iconography and language of American patriotism, the Constitution, and yet internally have subverted all of the levers of power to carry out what John Ralston Saul calls a coup d'etat in slow motion. And that's what's happened. And Citizens United 2010 Supreme Court ruling was the end. Everything becomes theater now. That's why they're spending $2.5 billion on this election, because the corporate state doesn't produce products that are different. It produces brands that are different, and brands are very expensive to sell. The mantra within this faux liberal class is the same mantra that you find within the neoconservatives, and that is that we as citizens must kneel before the dictates of the marketplace. It's an absurdity. 3,000 years of economic history. There's nothing to support the idea that human societies should be built around the dictates of the marketplace. And that has become our utopian vision. And I use the word utopia the way Thomas More coined it in 1516. Utopia literally means no place. It doesn't exist. And we are being disempowered by an ideology that is rapidly creating a kind of global neo-feudalism, a world of masters and serfs, a world where the American worker, like workers in all of the industrialized countries, are being told that they have to be competitive on in a global marketplace, which means being competitive with prison labor in China or sweatshop workers in Bangladesh who make 22 cents an hour. And so Sacco and Joe Sacco, I met Joe in Bosnia in 1995 when he was working on his book, A Safe Area, Garajda. We went to Garajda together. I don't know much about graphic novels, but I know something about journalism, and I realized this was certainly one of the most brilliant journalists I'd met.
All right, you'll hear more about Cris Hedges and Joe Sacco, how they met back in 95 and so on. These are the two brilliant minds who collaborated on this book, Days of Destruction, Days of Revolt, Cris Hedges and Joe Sacco. So we'll return to more of that in a moment. It is now 30 minutes after the hour. We are now exactly halfway through our program this afternoon. Yes, half the way through. And how can this be, you ask? Talkback is heard Monday through Thursday from 3 until 5 in the afternoon. Well, that happens to be the case today because we are here we have the benefit of an additional hour. And this is a good thing. And we'd like to really make it count in every conceivable way. So I'd like you now to head to the telephones, and here's the number to call with a tax-deductible contribution to WBAI on this first day of what we hope is going to be a very short make-up membership and fundraising drive to make up for that which was lost as a result of Hurricane Sandy. When Sandy struck, we were at the height of our fall membership and fundraising drive, the very first such drive of the fiscal year, which also happens to be the drive that sets the tone for the remainder of the fiscal year. And so needless to say, it was it did take a significant toll in more ways than one. We're not going to belabor that point now. You already are very familiar with much of what has happened. So I'm asking you now to join those who are on the line at the moment and call this number, 917-580-6021. That's 917-580-6021. That is the number to call. We do not yet have our regular telephone lines restored by Verizon, which is why we're using this emergency number. It is a different number from the one to which you are accustomed. So I'd like to respectfully suggest that you make a note of it. It is 917-580-6021. That's 917-580-6021. It is the number to call with your tax-deductible pledge of support to WBAI. Also, I'd like to remind you, what we've been sharing with you thus far are extended excerpts from Cris Hedges' brilliant talk delivered at the Society for Ethical Culture in October when I hosted an evening with Cris Hedges, an evening that we titled Days of Destruction, Days of Revolt, after the title of his latest book, Days of Destruction, Days of Revolt. Now, that evening with Cris Hedges at the Ethical Culture Society is available to you either on DVD or on an audio CD as a thank you gift with your pledge at the $75 level. That's all it will take. A $75 tax-deductible contribution to WBAI gets you that talk by Cris Hedges on either CD or DVD. It's your choice. You get it at the $75 pledge level. If in addition to the talk you'd also like to get a copy of the book, that's a $125 pledge. But if you already have the book, you can, but you do not yet have my trilogy of interviews, the signature interviews that I did with Cris Hedges after the publication of each of his last 3 books, Empire of Illusion, Death of the Liberal Class, and Days of Destruction. Those 3 interviews are available on audio CD as a thank you gift to you with your pledge at the $75 level as well. So that's a $75 pledge to WBAI for those 3 interviews on audio CD. Interviews I did with Cris Hedges, signature interviews following the publication of each of his last 3 books, Empire of Illusion, Death of the Liberal Class, and Days of Destruction. The number is 917-580-6021. And if when you call you don't get a response immediately, please bear with us. We do have volunteers who are standing by right now to take your call. Last I was in there in the tally room, we might have been short a person or 2. So I hope that you would bear with us if when you call you don't get an immediate response. My sense, though, is that those volunteers who are there and to whom we are extremely grateful, they are really very efficient. They're working very efficiently to process your pledges of support. You can use your Visa, American Express, or MasterCard. You can honor your pledge with a personal check or money order. You can use the electronic funds transfer system or the installment plan. Please continue to call 212. Nope.
Caught you.
I nearly did it. I nearly did it. There's a bet on here to see who's going to be the first person. Well, Michael G. Haskell, how about you have a go at it?
All right, Hugh. 917-580-6021. Again, 917-580-6021. And we thank you so very, very much for calling in to Talk Back with Hugh Hamilton, reconnecting with us. It's been so long. It's been a month since we have been able to give out a phone number. Now, we were just toying with the Skype just for the past several days, being able to get some phone calls in, talking to some guests around the country. Now we have a phone number. This is an emergency number now because of all of what has happened over this past month since Hurricane Sandy roared into this bay, or up the East River, and up this street right here. 917-580-6021. We were caught, and the station was inundated, not to say the station, but the building was inundated with water, so it compromised a lot of the building systems, the telephone and the electrical systems. But now we're clawing our way back to be able to broadcast here in our studios. We're happy to be back here with you, and just as soon as we've taken care of these responsibilities, we will be back to you. We will be connecting with you. One of the things we wanted to do, Hugh wanted to do desperately yesterday, was to have a throwdown, to talk to you. That's what you can do on this radio station, because you have so many stories to tell post Sandy, and we're going to be getting to that. But right now we have to take care of this business because of the fact that we had to stop our fundraising drive because Sandy was coming in, and because we didn't want to put the volunteers in jeopardy. We were in an evacuation zone A, so we had to get out for the most part. 917-580-6021. Make your calls now. $75, the Cris Hedges audio CD, that's available. You can talk to the people in the tally room, and they will guide you through the process. It's very safe. It's very, very easy. It's only going to take about 3 or 4 minutes to make that pledge to WBAI. Keep Talkback centrally located. It is so important, this program, and WBAI is so important. So we're happy to be reconnecting with you. We're happy that you are helping us now finish up this fundraising drive, this this first fundraising drive of the fiscal year. 917-580-6021. Visa card, MasterCard, American Express. 917-580-6021.
Indeed. Thank you very much to those of you who are on the line. Thank you very much to those of you who are about to make that call. 917-580-6021. I just want to share this paragraph here from Cris Hedges' book, Days of Destruction, Days of Revolt, before we return to more from Cris Hedges. He writes, the corporate leviathan that migrated with the steady and ominous thud of destruction from the outer sacrifice zones. Let me start that again. The corporate leviathan has migrated with the steady and ominous thud of destruction from the outer sacrifice zones to devour what remains. The vaunted American dream, the idea that life will get better, that progress is inevitable if we obey the rules and hard work, that material prosperity is assured, has been replaced by a hard and bitter truth. The American dream, we now know, is a lie. We will all be sacrificed. The virus of corporate abuse, the perverted belief that only corporate profit matters, has spread to outsource our jobs, cut the budgets of our schools, close our libraries, and plague our communities with foreclosures and unemployment. This virus has brought with it a security and surveillance state that seeks to keep us all on a reservation. No one is immune. The suffering of the other, of the Native American, the African American in the inner city, the unemployed coal miner, or the Hispanic produce picker, is universal. They went first, we are next. The indifference we showed to the plight of the underclass, in biblical terms our neighbor, haunts us. We failed them, and in doing so we failed ourselves. We are accomplices to our own demise. Revolt is all we have left. It is the only hope. Now, that's from Cris Hedges. You see, from chapter 5 of his book. The chapter 5 is titled Days of Revolt. Now, the number to call, thank you very much, 917-580-6021. That's 917-580-6021. Please continue to call while the presentation is in progress. We're going to rejoin this presentation now from Cris Hedges' talk over at the Society for Ethical Culture in October, an evening with Cris Hedges that I hosted there at the Society for Ethical Culture. A wonderful evening, very, very well attended, tremendous audience, very enthusiastic audience. Brother Africa was there. I met Brother Africa was there. Absolutely.
Yes.
We took a picture together, photograph together.
Wonderful.
Oh yes, that's right. So it really was such a wonderful experience to meet with him and all that, and I was very touched by his support and enthusiasm as well. So and indeed, so many of you who were there, we really did appreciate it, and we continue to appreciate it. Well, that event was captured on both audio CD and on DVD, and it's available to you as a thank you gift at this afternoon with your pledge at the $75 level. Now, of course, when we make something available at the $75 level, it means that, of course, we need to have an avalanche of pledges at that level in order for us to in order for us to move the tally along in the manner that would be desirable. Usually we try to aim for about $4,000 an hour during prime time, which is the time that we're in right now, and as the custodian of that time, I'm very mindful of it, and as the person with the privilege of occupying this space in this number one media market in the world, in the middle of the FM dial, on this diadem of the FM dial, WBAI New York. So the number to call is 917-580-6021. That's 917-580-6021. Your $75 pledge can get you either the DVD or the audio CD of our evening with Cris Hedges, discussing his book, Days of Destruction, Days of Revolt. And if you'd like to get a copy of the book together with the DVD or CD, that you get the two together with your pledge at the $125 level. We also have, at the $75 level, my signature collection, the trilogy of interviews I did with Cris Hedges following the publication of each of his last three books, Empire of Illusion, Death of the Liberal Class, and Days of Destruction. So those interviews are available, all three of them, on a 4 CD set. And that's available as well at the $75 pledge level, and that's hours of listening. So do join those who are on the line right now. The number 917-580-6021. We thank you so much for your support. 917-580-6021. As we return now to more of Cris Hedges from an evening with Cris Hedges at the Society for Ethical Culture, discussing his book with the internationally acclaimed and award-winning cartoonist Joe Sacco. The book is called Days of Destruction, Days of Revolt, and we thank you very much for your support. Please continue to call while the presentation is in progress. Here now, more of the Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist and author, Mr. Cris Hedges.
The mantra within this faux liberal class is the same mantra that you find within the neoconservatives. And that is that we as citizens must kneel before the dictates of the marketplace. It's an absurdity. 3,000 years of economic history. There's nothing to support the idea that human societies should be built around the dictates of the marketplace. And that has become our utopian vision. And I use the word utopia the way Thomas More coined it in 1516. Utopia literally means no place. It doesn't exist. And we are being disempowered by an ideology that is rapidly creating a kind of global neo-feudalism, a world of masters and serfs, a world where the American worker, like workers in all of the industrialized countries, are being told that they have to be competitive on in a global marketplace, which means being competitive with prison labor in China or sweatshop workers in Bangladesh who make 22 cents an hour. And so Sacco and Joe Sacco, I met Joe in Bosnia in 1995 when he was working on his book, A Safe Area, Gorazda. We went to Gorazda together. I don't know much about graphic novels, but I know something about journalism, and I realized this was certainly one of the most brilliant journalists I'd met. He reports the story out, and then he draws it out. It's very labor-intensive. It takes him a very long time to do it. He did a book called Footnotes in Gaza, which is one of the masterpieces, one of the great works of the Palestine-Israel conflict. It took him 6 years to do. And we wanted to do a book because we wanted to walk into the sacrifice zones, these places that have been sacrificed first, and make them visible. And as a graphic novelist, as a cartoonist, he can do things that even a photographer can't do. He can switch within the book, as it does, to describe people's lives and give it a kind of filmic quality. The whole point of the book, and I think what hopefully raised it to, or gave it a kind of punch that it wouldn't have had with simple prose, is that we want you to be able to see. And what happened in these sacrifice zones, these are the places that went first. These were the places where corporate capital moved in and broke all forms of opposition. And we begin in Pine Ridge, South Dakota. Lakota Indian Reservation, second poorest county in the country. At the average life expectancy for a male in Pine Ridge is 48. That is the lowest in the Western Hemisphere outside of Haiti. At any one time, 60% of the dwellings in Pine Ridge, many of which are sod huts, have neither electricity or running water. Because what happened to the native communities is the template for the imperial adventures that took place in Cuba, the Philippines, that's taking place in Iraq, Afghanistan, and that is the template by which now the last vestiges of the country are, in business terms, a term Mitt Romney publicly uses, being harvested. You had railroad magnates, timber merchants, speculators, miners who wanted the land, saw the indigenous community as an impediment, killed off by the end 95% of them, drove them into what were at first called prisoner of war camps, then became Indian agencies, and then became reservations, broke the capacity for self-sufficiency, and created a culture of dependence. But even more importantly, I think, these indigenous communities had to be destroyed because they offered another ethic, another way of relating within a communal structure. Indigenous leaders who hoarded goods were despised within a native community. Everything was communal. And if you look at Karl Marx's notebooks, and they're not in the mainstream, I had to get it out of the rare book room in the Princeton University Library, you see detailed notations of the structure of Iroquois society. Marx and Engels were fascinated by how native indigenous communities structured their relationships to each other and the natural world. There's a very fine book by the economist Karl Polanyi, written in 1944, called The Great Transformation, in which he writes about unfettered, unregulated capitalism. And even though he's an economist, he uses the word sacred. He says that when a society loses the capacity for the sacred, when nothing has an intrinsic value but everything has a monetary value, then these forces which commodify the natural world and commodify human beings exploit them until exhaustion or collapse. Which is why the environmental crisis is intimately twinned with the economic crisis. 40% of the summer Arctic sea ice melts, which should terrify all of us. And the response of the corporate state is to send up drill teams to mine the last vestiges of gas, oil, minerals, and fish stocks. It's insane. It makes Moby Dick the most prescient study of the American character to date. We are all on the Pequod. We are all led by Ahab, who said, "My methods and my means are sane. Only my object is mad." To allow the fossil fuel industry to determine our relationship to the planet, and I hope you're all on your vacation time going to go out and physically block the XL Keystone pipeline. These people are extracting the last bits of profit out of the death throes of the planet, and they will take us all down with them if we let them. Thank you. And we will all, if we don't resist, end up on one vast reservation. And that is, of course, what the security and surveillance state is about. I used to wonder, was Huxley right in terms of dystopia, or was Orwell right? Well, it turns out they were both right. Because first we got Huxley. We were amused and entertained and seduced into a world of hedonism and easy credit and mass-produced goods. And once that credit dried up, and those mass-produced goods were no longer cheap, we had already been economically and politically disempowered. And then we get Oceania. Then we get the iron boot of a much harsher form of totalitarianism, which of course began in our marginal communities. A night raid in Bedford-Stuy or Oakland in every way resembles a night raid in Fallujah. There is no difference. The doors kicked down, dressed in black, Kevlar plates, command centers, automatic weapons, and when Imperiums die, they bring the harsher forms of control on the edges of empire back to the heart of empire. Thucydides wrote about it, about the death of Athenian democracy. He said, the tyranny Athens imposed on others, it finally imposed on itself. And that's where we are. That's what's happening. I didn't mention one more assault on civil liberties by the Obama administration, and that's the National Defense Authorization Act. Section 1021, which authorizes the U.S. military for the first time in over 200 years to carry out the arrest of American citizens deemed to have substantially supported, whatever that means, Al-Qaeda, the Taliban, or something called associated forces. Hold them in military facilities without due process until, in the language of that section, the end of hostilities, which in an age of permanent war is probably forever. And in January, I sued the president and Leon Panetta. I was joined by Daniel Ellsberg and Noam Chomsky. And in September, federal judge Catherine B. Forrest declared the law invalid. Now, the reaction of the Obama administration for me was quite telling. We knew they'd appeal, but they didn't just appeal. They asked Judge Forrest for a stay, meaning put the law into effect until the appellate court can hear the case and make a ruling. She refused. That aggressively could mean only one thing. They're already using the law. Because if they were holding American citizens in military facilities without due process, and that injunction was on the books, they would be in contempt of court. And so our suspicion is there are probably U.S. Pakistani dual nationals sitting in cells in military holding facilities in places like Bagram and other places. After Pine Ridge, we went to Camden, New Jersey, per capita the poorest city in the United States, and not surprisingly, one of the most dangerous. Camden used to be an industrial center. 36,000 people used to work in its shipyards. Campbell's Soup was made there. RCA Victor produced records there. It's all gone. And of course, as anybody who comes from a marginal community understands, you have invisible and visible walls that keep you hemmed in. And there is no way economically to walk out of a place like Camden, and if you rebel, you'll find yourself within the prison system. As the poet Yusuf Komunyakaa has said quite correctly, the cell block has replaced the auction block. That we've created through this prison network. We hold 25% of the world's prison population, most of whom are people of color. We've created a mechanism by which we disenfranchise our poor, and especially our people of color. I just came back from Alabama. 34% of African American males cannot vote because they have a criminal record. 34%, a number expected to rise to 40. And Camden becomes symptomatic of the move by the corporate state to move all of our manufacturing first over the border into Mexico, and now we're seeing large-scale factory closures as these factories migrate to the Philippines, Vietnam, the cut-rate embrace of China's totalitarian capitalism, and those left behind become, in the eyes of the corporate state, human refuse, human detritus. We went to the old coal fields of southern West Virginia. And there, of course, the coal companies want to dig down seams. They blow the top.
This is my favorite music. Okay, we're pausing here for a moment in order to take care of some technical things. As you can tell, there's a couple of these machines are giving us some problems. The CD players. So we're gonna try to sort that out, and then we'll return to more. We had about. Let's see. Yeah, we're going to try to deal with that and come back in a moment. But if you've only now joined us, you're listening to extended excerpts from an evening with Cris Hedges at the Society for Ethical Culture held in October. I hosted that evening with Cris Hedges. Cris Hedges discussed his book, Days of Destruction, Days of Revolt. He gave, as you can tell, a riveting talk. We also have, in addition to the talk by Cris Hedges, we also have, it's a double CD, you see. In addition to that, we also have the question and answer session. Now, that evening was recorded. It was captured on both audio CD and on DVD. And we'll send you your choice of either the audio CD or the DVD of an evening with Cris Hedges at the Ethical Culture Society, New York City Ethical Culture Society. We'll send that to you with your pleasure at the $75 level. This sounds like Sata Masagana. Yep, that's right. It is, this takes me back